Hoi Esther. Hoi hoi. Ja, je kan even naar de zwaaien. Je moet even naar de camera.
En dan moet je voor de camera verkennen. Nee, ja, maar de rest zit je dan ook allemaal, hè? Ja, je kunt niet in de publiek gaan.
Oké.
Nee, je moet er verder bij staan en verder naast maakt het uit.
Kan die wel iets lager?
Oh, nee,
Dit is Esther, onze pedel. En dat is Niek Tramper. En nee, Kees van Vera. Toch wel heel leuk om zo mensen hier te zien. Ja. Ja. Oh, Christine, yes. Kan zij mij nu zien?
What a solemn silence and a very good way to start this very special ceremony. The promotion of Berdine van de Toren, Lekkerkerker. Be very welcome, all of you. We hope to extend and see also a very warm welcome to very special and dear colleagues of us, some of whom have been members of the jury, others have been involved in the project, like Professor Christine Kim, who was the co-promoter of this project. I will introduce others of them who will pose their opposition questions this afternoon. But let me now start this ceremony by saying a short prayer. Let us pray. Merciful God, clothed with wisdom and splendor, source of joy and light, we pray you, grant us wisdom and insight through Jesus Christ, in whom all treasures of wisdom and knowledge are hidden. Amen. Please be seated. In ceremonies like this, of course, we are improvising a little bit, although we are used to it, to do it in hybrid or other forms during the last year. But things can go wrong, and I'm already apologizing if anyone or anything is maybe a little bit falling in another order than normally. But we would like to start now with the opposition, and I would like to give the floor to our esteemed associate professor of dogmatics and also involved in all kinds of projects on intercultural theology, Dr. Klaas Bom. Klaas, to you is the floor. Oh, jij doet het daar vandaan. Ja.
Esteemed candidates, congratulations with your impressive book. But I have some questions. I'm specifically interested in the way you handle both social sciences and theology. On page 121, you claim firmly, in sum, even though this research is using relevant tools and reflections from the social sciences, it is fully theological. However, I'm not completely convinced. I understand that Watkins and Cameron and Fiddens make similar claims when it comes to the Four Voices approach and theological action research. However, in your dissertation, before introducing the Four Voices approach, you explore the context in chapter 2, following Baumann and Castells in their sociological understanding of community. As far as I can see, these sociological understandings are constantly present in this research and function as a norm. When the Four Voices approach has been followed consequently, this sociological input would have been part of what is called formal theology and could have been corrected or completed by formal theological perspectives. However, now the sociological definitions come before the theological research and therefore determines the theological research that follows. This makes your research not fully theological, from my perspective, but hybrid. What is your perspective on my argumentation and on the relationship between theology and sociology in your research?
Learned opponent, thank you for your kind words on the book and for your question that goes to the heart of the method of this book, speaking about the relationship between sociology and theology. And the question is, if I've understood you well, is this research really fully theological? Or, yes, you call it hybrid. When I work with the concept of lived theology, then that includes everything. So it includes the sociological questions, it includes the emotional experience, it includes any element of human life that is involved in the community experience. Now, I've placed sociology at the beginning because that was the start of my questioning of the whole concept of community. So that is an expression of how the research evolved within my particular situation, in this particular situation. And this sociological reality, I believe is bigger than the formal theology within the four voices, because it involves living in the same house. It involves questions about who am I in relation to we that can be understood theologically and asked theologically. But and for me in my research, really are, in that sense, viewed and questioned from a theological perspective. So I start with a description of what I found in the sociological research, but then when I start reflecting on it, I am fully reflecting on it from my theological standpoint, from my theological questions, from my theological experience in all areas of my life and the life of the community. And I think the community itself would say the same, because they do experience their own reality, their own lived reality as fully theological. There is no reality for them that goes beyond or is outside theology. Everything is theologically colored and experienced and understood in their own life. Is it hybrid? One of the things I found very helpful, what I read from Professor John Swinton, is that he says it's the relationship between theology and sociology or social sciences is a mutually welcoming relationship. So you engage, in my case, in a theological question with the sociological reflections in a way that you can receive what sociology has to give and receive it in a theological way.
Thank you so very much. Microfoon het, ik geloof het wel, hè? Thank you so very much. I can see that you are in the flow now. That is okay.
I needed to
Please,
get into it, yes.
We will refrain it for the answer to this one. And since you have mentioned Professor Swinton, we would like to introduce him as well to this session. He is Professor of Practical Theology and Pastoral Care at the School of Divinity, History and Philosophy, King's College, University of Aberdeen. And he is with us and also willing to pose a question. The floor is yours.
Well, esteemed candidate, your study was fascinating and really very interesting and important in a number of different ways. The kind of method that you use requires reflexivity as kind of central to the way in which you work out what is you and what is research. You didn't really talk overtly about reflexivity in your study. Could you tell us a little bit about how that factored in and why you didn't kind of highlight it?
Yes, thank you, esteemed opponent, for your kind words and question about reflexivity. And when you mention reflexivity, there is, I believe in my research, there are two ways that reflexivity is used. The way that in sociological circles, Beck and Beck-Gernsheim use reflexivity as an intuitive reaction, a reflex. Whereas, of course, in practical theology, reflexivity is also used in the sense that when you enter into a situation, you realize it is you who is entering into that situation, and therefore you have to reflect on what the influence is of yourself when you enter that situation, how you change possibly that situation, and how you perceive that situation, of course, depends on who you are and what your experience and personal views are. So, and I think you are talking about the second way of using reflexivity. Well, I call this research researching my family. I'm part of this community that I've researched, which of course means that I'm an insider. And I describe how that can be. And in my case, I have experienced that as an asset because the conversations next to the coffee machine, or the conversations you just overhear, they also contribute in a way that you could hardly ever get if you're only an outsider. And I believe I had deeper access to a lot of the information than I would have had if I was just an outsider. Yet, I did realize that because I'm an insider, I could easily hear a concept and take it with me without reflecting if that concept is exactly the same as used in the same way as that I would use it or received it. So in that sense, I've had to constantly sort of take a step back. As Professor Roost says, there is a need for the ivory tower, so I had to sort of put myself also out of the situation. Now, in a sense, that was helpful that we moved to the Netherlands. So we are at the other side of the pond at the moment. And so there is a physical distance, but also a culture distance, etc., which helps that reflexivity towards bias, for example. But also that's a personal bias, but also, of course, I have had to check with the people, have I understood you correctly? And so I've also sent people some of the excerpts of the work and asked them, is this a fair representation of what you have shared with me? So I have used these sort of methods to build in reflexivity into the very method of the research in order to not just tell my own things and my own thoughts. And I think that's also the joy, because that's where you discover the surprising elements.
Thank you so very much. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Harvey Kwiani. He is a lecturer of African Christianity and Theology and a program leader of the Master Program of African Christianity in Liverpool, Hope University. Please, we are so happy that you can join us. You can pose your question now.
Esteemed candidate, thank you so much for your great work that you did in this book. I enjoyed learning from you. You take us to Oxford and of course, you start the book basically by talking about a Nigerian friend that you met at OCMS. He talked about community in a way that you actually say you found a bit puzzling. Now, when you move into the thesis itself and you begin to talk about community, the awareness of other ways of understanding community disappear. So you go to Manuel Castells and Zygmunt Bauman. I'm wondering whether your argument and your understanding of community in this book would have been helped by engaging voices from other parts of the world. I'm aware that you have lived in Africa and you are aware of how Africans think about community. Would that understanding of community have spoken into this thesis and lead you to a different place? Thank you.
Learned opponent, thank you for your encouraging words at the beginning and your question about the contribution that could have been have had a place in this book from community understanding in other parts of the world, and indeed community understanding here in the West, and I'm using Western sociologists and a lot of Western theologians, and which in a sense, I must say I regret. I think if I would start this research now, my bibliography would have been different, I believe. And that's a process of growing through the research and with a much more intense looking for resources from other parts of the world that are not necessarily directly available if you Google or go on Atla, etc. That first. On the other hand, this book is written in a European context and for the European context. This book is not written for Africa or Asia because CMS Britain is a British community. It started as a British community, it sees itself as a worldwide community, and we are not allowed to say that the headquarters are in Oxford, but that's how many people do feel it is. And so, which is part of the ambivalent reality. So in that sense, I felt I needed to go especially to the Western sociological questions to understand how, for an organization as CMS in a Western context, there would be a way of maybe a renewed way of understanding community in their particular context with their particular questions that are coming from the Western understanding of community. And it's absolutely true that the understanding of community, but also the understanding of self, who am I, is completely different in Africa than it is here. And thinking about me as a person and an individual in relation to the other starts at a totally different starting point. And so then, of course, you would come to a very different outcome. And maybe we could work together on it one day to get more of that perspective.
Thank you so very much. We will pass on and give the floor to our dear colleague Dorothea Notch. She is a professor of theology and missiology, specialized in the field of theology and migration. Professor Notch, it's up to you now.
Thank you, esteemed candidate. My question is about ambivalence, one of the key notions of your research. You enter in conversation on its definition with Ida Ulus, who gained insights on ambivalence through researching, and I quote you from page 356, workplace emotions in post-colonial spaces in the context of racial tensions and white privilege, unquote. You evoke her definition of ambivalence both as a conscious and unconscious emotions based on experiences. And you also dialogue with Blake Ashford and his colleagues who look at ambivalence both as an emotional and as a cognitive construct. And then you construct your own arguments on ambivalence through the notion of ambivalent experience. And you give convincing examples of how this becomes visible in your research data. I've learned much from your book. And I've learned from your research that ambivalence, or ambivalent experience, as you prefer to call it, are those components of your context of what you define as individualized and globalized word, or even more. I learned that no mission studies without the notion of ambivalence. Nevertheless, I came to this conclusion while reading your book, not so much through your engagement with Ada Ulus and Blake Ashford, but through a rereading of Zygmunt Bauman. So you brought me once again back to Zygmunt Bauman, one whom you introduced together with Manuel Castells in order to create a theoretical framework for studying your communities. My question is, what is the reason of abandoning the conversation with Zygmunt Bauman when it comes to ambivalence? Bauman, the social theorist when it comes to ambivalence. Like you, Bauman tries to convince his readers ambivalent and the fragmentary are not momentary obstacles in our desire to understand the world, but remain part and parcel of the human way of comprehending, of trying to understand the world. Bauman has also been eager to work out the significance of ambivalence in social life and our concerns for it. So once again, esteemed candidate, why ambivalence without Zygmunt Bauman in the third part of your book?
Learned opponent, I am very sorry we could not hear very well a part of your question that I think is very important, where you indicate how Bauman uses ambivalence in his social research and social descriptions. Could I ask you to please repeat that part of the question?
Yes, my question simply is, why do you abandon Bauman when you discuss your own notion of ambivalence? Because Bauman, like yourself, comes to the conclusion that our word is inherently ambiguous. So it is, the fragmentary is not a temporary something which comes and goes, it stays with us, and it is a human condition of interpreting the word.
Learned opponent, thank you for the way you have asked your question in a full perspective of the book, and asking about ambivalence and the relationship with how Bauman, Zygmunt Bauman, uses ambivalence in his sociological reflections. My understanding of ambivalence, the way I have started to work with ambivalence, came partly out of the post-colonial questions, using Homi Bhabha, Ida Ulus, etc., of course, because that was also the place where I started, when I started to ask the questions. So for me, that was a natural place to go to start the thinking about ambivalence, when I realized that that was a big issue or a big component of the community experience. When Bauman describes our lived condition as an ambivalent reality, it does not for me really, it is unable for me to really describe the situation that I met in the the Church Mission Society, because when Bauman describes the lived reality, it is very much from a perspective of sometimes I have called him, and this is very irreverent, I've called him a little bit an old grumpy man, in the sense that his approach to reality I found very full of negative connotations. There was very little hope, there was very little joy. It is a full description of how things can go wrong and how things will never be like it was before, but then with very little hope of how it could be in this current context and into the future. And when I look at CMS, then I see that people struggle with the ambivalent reality. I see that people sometimes even say, one could have become very bitter, but what then is the crux? He has not become bitter, this one person, because this one person is still very connected to the community and feels very strongly about the purpose of the community and about the people in the community and the relationships he experiences within the community, and that helps him, well, it actually feels like calls him back into that community, even though he has had experience of being sidelined and excluded. So in Bauman, I have not found this perseverance from a positive perspective, from a perspective of receiving that which is good and celebrating it in the face of pain and injustice. So in my reading of Bauman, and again, I stand to be corrected, in my reading of Bauman, the ambivalence goes very much more, it's very much about revealing the problematic and less about celebrating the good.
Thank you so very much. We will now pass on to a colleague that can probably never be called grumpy. That is our dear colleague Stefan Baas. He is a professor of the Baving Professor of Missiology and Intercultural Theology at the Department of Beliefs and Practices at the Free University in Amsterdam. Please, we are so happy that you can join us and you can pose your question.
Esteemed candidate, I thank you very much for a well-structured and very lucid dissertation. I've really enjoyed it, and I think I've learned from it a lot. Thank you. My question is about the theological foundation for your theory of community. You seem to find this in the relationship between community and mission on pages 69 to 74. And that's why you mentioned the word church occasionally, which makes me happy, because in my view it's quite self-evident that the theological foundation of community from a Christian perspective is found in ecclesiology. But precisely this foundation remains rather general and abstract. That is, I think, because your main level of analysis is the worldwide community, or the sodality of CMS, obviously. But also perhaps because a Christological reflection on what community means, for example, in the New Testament, seems to be lacking, apart from some references to the work of Haulas. Wouldn't it have been better to take your theoretical starting point in the local community of the church, like in the New Testament, and then continue with an exploration of a concept like koinonia? This would open us up, I think, to a much richer texture of the idea that the Christian community is Christ-centered, as you mentioned in passing on page 16. without really working it out. In exploring this concept, we would also touch on, for example, other dimensions of koinonia, like supporting each other financially, the Eucharist, obviously, koinonia with Christ, the gifts of the Spirit, the congregation as a hermeneutic of the gospel, and so forth. And especially since community is so important in your study, it would have been worth your while, I think, to begin with this local community of the church and work this out towards worldwide ecumenical relationships, for example, the household of God, rather than the other way around. Could you perhaps reflect on this a little bit?
Learned opponent, thank you for your words and for this question about the Christological foundation for community, and would it be better to start in the local rather than from the worldwide perspective? While it is really important to realize that community will never be real without the local, there is no community without a local expression, I have found that a lot of reflections on community do focus on this part, on the local. There are so many books about missional communities, about missional local communities. And the questions as they came to me through participating in the different communities I have participated in the past, and then coming into the Church Mission Society, the questions weren't so much about the local community. My questions were really related to the possibility, or rather possibly the impossibility of community around the world. And that, of course, from within the context of the realization that, yes, but in Christianity we do speak about the body of Christ. We do speak about brothers and sisters also when people are living at the other side of the world and we may never meet them. And when CMS was working on this idea of redefining their relationships within the context of post-coloniality, these were the pressing questions. How do we redefine our relationships? How do we reshape them in such a way that that there is justice, that the inequality will be not an obstacle, but something recognized and taken seriously, and then worked towards transformation of those relationships. Now, these are questions around the worldwide, and that was also the reason why I have focused on the worldwide. And yes, I see that the word koinonia, the concept of koinonia is very basic to our community understanding as a community of Christ, and has all these elements that I have tried to describe in the experience of the community. But then my method has been to look, in order to come to a description of community. I have not started with the theological. I started with the lived experience and come to the description of Church Mission Society as a community with a focus on the worldwide. And I'm losing my train of thought here.
Focus on the worldwide.
So would it have a richer texture? Possibly. But the research question, when I speak about the theological element, is a description of how I found it in the Church Mission Society, more than how I developed it myself. So chapter 7 is a reflection of what I have found, and that in conversation with the wider theological and sociological reflections. And so, yes, koinonia could have played a role there, but I didn't find it so much in the description from the people in the research. And I have used, of course, much of CMS's formal theology, which also not uses the term koinonia so much. So that could be something to help them discover, maybe.
Thank you very much. We are also very eager to hear our colleague of the Protestant Theological University, Dr. Rein Brouwer. He is Associate Professor of Practical Theology. Dr. Brouwer, may I invite you?
Thank you, Madam Dean. Esteemed candidate, I want to take you to chapter 9 of your thesis, and in particular section 932. This section 932 is about diversity as division. In this section, you express being surprised by the fact that different views on the acceptance of homosexual relationships were hardly brought up during the interviews, although it being a much debated issue in the Anglican Church, definitely at the time of your research. You provide us in this section with 2 examples from the interviews. The first one calls the disagreement on homosexuality a minor issue. The second one calls it a sideline. You write on page 295, and I quote, "It's hard to see how this particular experience of difference in the polarized reality of today's world, and more particularly in the Anglican Communion, can be seen as a gift to be celebrated and an opportunity to learn." I have a threefold question about this section, the examples and the quote. The first question is, what is the meaning of the quote? Could you say a little bit more about that? The second question is, how do you interpret the picture in your thesis on page 76? How do you interpret this picture with regard to the acceptance of LGBTI people in the Anglican Church? And the third question, what is the role of 2 of the metaphors you use, the family metaphor and also the closed circle metaphor? What is the role of these metaphors in maybe covering up apparently fundamental disagreements?
Yes. Learned opponent, thank you for your pertinent question. A question I have struggled with myself as well. What is the meaning of the quote? Let me start there. What I've come across listening to the people within CMS is that there is a fear of exclusion, and exclusion is even named a sin by several people, as contrary to the being of God. Then, and that's often a general statement, which may, which may cover all areas of life and faith and religions, etc. On the other hand, there is this reality in the Anglican communion, and we all, I think, know about it, how it may be leading to a split in a church worldwide. And that is also what people fear. People are very afraid of what might happen, and how can we keep each other, how can we keep hold of each other. And of course, if we then think about how you, and so this is an ambivalent reality, I believe. This is one of the examples of an ambivalent reality, where people may sort of move between dealing with that ambivalence in negating one of the elements, or in pretending it's not there, or in choosing one over the other, or holding both. So the more, which Ashford then calls wisdom, holism, holding both elements before and allowing conflict to happen when these two meet, as an opportunity to transformation, as an opportunity to grow, as a place of creativity. I see these quotes within that context. So on the one hand, the fear of letting go of part of the church, and a fear of excluding some of these members of the church, or many of the members of this church. So that's where people say, let's give it the name minor, and you could then say this is a way of not being willing to see the depth of what you're really saying, because how can we say that sexuality is a minor issue? And people will agree with that. Now, we always had a dream of people set free, that if we relate that, I think, in terms of the church mission society in the face of sexuality, then I think different people will come to different answers, and I cannot give one answer for the whole community. And there again, you see that this is a community that has an incredible diversity within it, and a people looking for ways of keeping hold of each other. In some cases, it will then feel to some people, it will sometimes feel as a closed circle. For others, it may not. So again, there is not just one experience of the whole community, and yes, it is, and the ambivalence I then sort of come to in the end. What would be the picture we would hope? That nobody is forced to adopt the idea of the other, ever, but be invited by the way we live in that context, from with the values that people have, and again that is a diversity. So that may end in a certain conflict, but a conflict where you will still see each other eye to eye, and where together you will look for ways of finding new freedom together, and new creativity, new opportunities.
There was still the last part of the question about the role of the metaphor of family.
Oh, I didn't hear that word, the role of the metaphor of the family. So yes, so there is a beautiful quote from Max Warren, who says, it's like a family. We are not, when we are walking to church, he says, we are not goose-stepping, a goose-stepping family. We are a family just walking to church, everyone in their own pace, everyone on their own, some will go left, some will go right, etc. So that's, the family is a given to each other with diversity, and sometimes you don't like your family members and you're still part of the same family, and you still, when you're angry with one family member and somebody else hurts that family member, you will defend that family member.
Thank you, so very kind. Since Dr. Brouwer was the last one in line, I would like to hear if he is satisfied with this answer, and if not, he can still come back to it.
Well, not being satisfied would mean maybe a huge discussion on the family concept, because there could also be some naivete connected to this metaphor, because families could also be very dangerous places and very hostile places also. So what I found in your research is that you use both these metaphors of the circle and the family sort of without too much reflexivity, I would say. And well, that's maybe also something for future research.
Thank you. Yes. The hora est has sound maybe not so clear in the Zoom session, but it is time now. Berdine van de Toren Lekkerkerker, the doctoral dissertation board, because we are with the whole board present over here, also in all kind of viewers that view us now, has heard your defense and will retire for deliberation. So the session is adjourned. This is taking about 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, so please be seated and enjoy this. There will be beautiful music, as is promised to me, so be listening to that. And we also hope that all our viewers at home will stay in this session. Thank you very much.
The session is resumed. Please, esteemed candidate, the doctoral dissertation board has taken note of your doctoral thesis and has heard your defense. And the board has decided to confer upon you the degree of doctor. I now ask the thesis supervisor, Professor Henk de Roest, to bestow this dignity on you in the customary manner.
By the power vested in us by law, and in accordance with the decision of the Doctoral Dissertation Board here present, I confer on you, Berdine van den Toren Lekkerkerker, the degree of doctor, including all rights and duties associated with this by law and custom with regard to science, church, and society. As evidence of this, I present to you the degree certificate signed by the rector and thesis supervisor and bearing the seal of the university. Zeer geleerde vrouwen, just installed doctor, dear Berdine. For the praising, the laudatio, I would first like to invite my co-supervisor, Professor Kirstine Kim, Fuller Theological Seminary, Pasadena, California. Professor Kim is Paul E. Person Chair in World Christianity and Associate Dean for the Center for Missiological Research. After Professor Kim, I will add a few words.
Thank you, Dr. de Roest. It is my privilege and pleasure to say a few words on this auspicious occasion. And the first word should be my congratulations to our esteemed candidate on presenting and defending this thesis that is today being awarded the PhD degree. So my congratulations, Dr. van den Toren. I did not know when I first started to supervise this research with Professor de Roest that before the end of it, I would have relocated from Britain to California. I am so glad that, despite this, I was able to continue and see this significant work through to the end. Although we live in a highly globalized world, we have seen during this pandemic how quickly societal and international relationships can be eroded. How important it is, therefore, to study how a global and diverse community can be built, resourced, and sustained, which is what Dr. van den Toren has done in this project. The Church Mission Society was born in the colonial era, but it has been rethinking itself since then through models of partnership and more recently as a community in mission. Through her painstaking and carefully documented interviews with CMS members, and also her engagement with CMS history and with theologies and theories of community, Dr. van den Toren concludes that the community life of CMS is in itself a form of mission, a participation in the wider mission of God, who is Trinitarian communion. This sense is captured in the title of her work, Community as Mission. However, the candidate is not promoting an idealistic view of some divine society in the sky that is a model for life on Earth. Her research is firmly rooted in the messy and sometimes painful realities of community living. She finds that while people in CMS are committed to this circle of shared existence, they also experience ambivalence as they discover that differences are real and true reciprocity is hard. There is no harmonious society, yet Dr. van den Toren suggests that living with ambiguity is a Christian virtue in which there is hope of transformation and a glimpse of the kingdom of God. I very much enjoyed getting to know Berdine better while supervising her work. I found her to be thorough and perceptive. She was quick to understand what was required and always keen to improve her research further. Indeed, she would have continued to perfect her thesis if Professor de Roost and I had not told her that she had done enough.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim. And I would like to express my gratitude to you for sharing so much of your time, energy, and expertise with Berdine in supervising her research. And I thank you in this regard for the wonderful cooperation that I experienced with you. Berdine, I would like to add a few words to the praising. In January 2015, so a little more than 6 years ago, you were officially admitted to the PhD trajectory of the PTHU. You had started your PhD research earlier with Professor Mechtelt Janssen as supervisor, and we are very grateful to her for this task that she fulfilled. But when she became rector of the PTHU, Professor Kirstien Kim and I took over her role. With your research, you hope to fill a lacuna in the research on mission societies, which until then was primarily conducted historically. You intended to do an empirical inquiry, using in-depth interviews with a wide diversity of members, using focus groups and documents. It needed to be an inquiry into a vibrant, border-transcending, worldwide community, Church Mission Society. It was your conviction that this community can be a resource for mission everywhere. But you also wondered, how can it be this resource, given its diversity in all respects, its past in colonial history, its faults, and also given the ambivalences that are part and parcel of participating in this community. You were keen not to idealize CMS, as Professor Kim also mentioned. And being a member of CMS yourself, you had to confront serious methodological problems. How to ensure that your insider perspective could become a tool for deeper understanding without compromising your independence, academic integrity, and critical stance. And in order to avoid representationalism, and as a remedy to your power as researcher, how could you acknowledge the knowledge and insights of the practitioners and conduct your research in a truly collaborative way? In my view, your research project had a high level of difficulty, and your execution of it reveals a high level of self-reflexivity on your part as researcher. Throughout the process, I've come to admire your ability to structure your research in time next to your work for CMS and your tasks in teaching and supervising in Asia and Africa. But you also structured your research in space. You created your own desk in the study room of the PTHU building in yet another tiny community of international and Dutch students. By creating these structures, you kept control and always had a clear overview. The pastoral cycle and the 4 voices of theology turned out to be helpful, and you designed an excellent diagram that guided you in every step. We were also impressed by the way you structured the analysis, where you made sense of the data in a threefold way, using sociological theories on community, theological perspectives from CMS theologians, and perspectives from academic theology. You became an expert in such a short time span. During the extensive coding process, you achieved an inspired, creative flow. Chapter after chapter was written, well written too, and you coined new concepts. Circle of shared existence, to name just one. Some physical problems hindered the pace of the research. And at one time, we were very worried about you. But you recovered and continued your research with great enthusiasm. You were always very reflective, never taking an advice or suggestion from us for granted. But then you would always summarize what we had said and use it to improve your text. You were highly motivated because you discovered that you truly had a gift to offer to the community that you are so committed to, the community that you serve. And that is what this book is, a beautiful gift. Coming to the end of this laudatio, also on behalf of Professor Kim, I would like to express our gratitude to the members of the assessment committee, the jury, chaired by Professor Dorothea Notch, and to the leadership of Church Mission Society, who gave Berdine the time to pursue the research. Here you stand, Berdine, shining, new interim director of the Dutch Mission Council, and committed to your professional tasks for CMS abroad. CMS has indeed become your family. Here you stand, in the city where you live, in this church, with Benno, with your family and friends close by, both physically and virtually, with your intelligently written book, to be submitted to the peer-reviewed Brill series, Theology and Mission in World Christianity. And here you stand with your official doctoral certificate. Yet, Berdine, your heart is also with the men and women that you have come to love and admire in the République Centrafricaine, and your heart is with your students in Malaysia and with your students in East Congo. During the time of the research, you kept teaching in missiological and theological education in some of the most difficult and dangerous regions of the world. I admire your courage. Yet I know that you are the first to say that it is these women and men living there who are courageous. Also for them, you've written this book as a resource for mission sent into the world by the triune God. We thank you, Berdine, also on their behalf.
Very learned, Madam. On behalf of the Doctoral Dissertation Board, I also congratulate you on the dignity that you have acquired. And I also include, of course, in my congratulations, your family and your extended family, as we talk about it now, maybe. So, and I would like you to sign the album of all our doctors, so that you are in this famous circle. Do you still have a pen? Yeah, okay. I'm so sorry. Over here. Thank you. And by that signing, we have now come to the end of this ceremony. And I will close this session with a doxology, and I would like you to stand. To the Almighty God, through whose light we see light, be the glory forever and ever, through Jesus Christ. Amen.
There is a little change of plan. Since Dr. Henk de Roest is unable to come with us to the restaurant, I would like to publicly say thank you. Not long, but from the heart. Dr. Vater, you are my Dr. Vater. You have willingly picked up the task of guiding me, correcting me, encouraging me through the whole process of the research. And I have deeply, deeply appreciated the way you were personally invested in it, in the topic, in my success, in the possibility to continue, but also about my personal situation, your deep interest in my life, also outside of the PTHU, and as you mentioned already with CMS, of course. So this has been an experience for me that involved much more than just the doing research. And I've really enjoyed the laughter and the fun that some crept into our conversations as well. And so you've really helped me through this process. Your presence has been sustaining, but also a model. You, in a sense, are really my Dr. Vater, and you will remain my Dr. Vater as a model. I have come to meet you, to see you as a man of faith who very, in a humble, deeply humble way, engages with theology, with the world, with people, out of a love and care for each of those areas. And that's a model I would like to follow in my life. So thank you very much. I have a present here for you. It's a modern icon, and it has everything to do with the topic. It's an icon that brings together people around the circle, in a circle where they are holding each other. They are all diverse, they are different, yet they all are whitely colored. And that's, of course, the color of celebration of resurrection. And they are centered around the center of God, Christ in the middle. So it's based on Galatians 5, that we are all, I can't quote in English nor in Dutch, but you know, the Jew, the Gentile, everybody, all the differences coming together around the love of God. So this is a token of my gratitude to you.